There is a scene in the very first episode of Friends that I have watched dozens of times, and I only recently understood what I was actually looking at. Ross is sitting at the coffee house, slumped into the couch. He says something that the show frames as the opening joke of the entire series. He says he just wants to be married again, and everyone around him laughs. His sister makes a face. Chandler makes a quip. The moment passes in about 12 seconds, but I keep coming back to those 12 seconds because what Ross just said, in the middle of all that laughter, was not actually a joke. It was a very specific and very revealing thing to admit in public 2 weeks after your wife left you. He did not say he wanted Carol back. He did not say he was not over her. He did not even say he missed her specifically. He said he wanted to be married again. The institution, the status, the very specific condition of having been permanently and unambiguously chosen by someone. And once you hear the difference between those two very specific things, the rest of the show plays completely differently. Most people think of Ross's Carol problem as a wound that healed, as backstory, as the thing that messed him up before the real story started.
If the Ralph Lauren people offered her her old job back, she would take it?
The real story being Rachel, the decade-long love story that the show was always building toward. I do not think that is the full picture. I think Carol never became the backstory for Ross. I think she stayed in the foreground of almost every romantic choice he made for 10 years. Not as a person he still had feelings for, but as the evidence of something he could never quite stop trying to disprove. I'm genuinely curious what you think before we go any further. Do you see the Carol thing as a resolved backstory, or have you always felt something lingering underneath the surface? Let me know down in the comments below. I want to hear your honest take on all of this. Let us start with what the Carol situation actually was, underneath the obvious layer that everyone discusses. The obvious layer is this, the one everyone already knows. Ross was in love with Carol. Carol discovered she was gay. Carol left Ross for Susan. Ross got divorced. End of backstory. But here is the layer underneath that. Ross Geller grew up as the golden child of his family, the miracle baby. The son whose mother lit up differently when he walked into a room. The one who was told implicitly and repeatedly that he was exceptional, that his feelings and his needs and his presence were more significant than average. And Carol was the first adult relationship in which Ross fully believed that the other person's love was unconditional. College sweethearts, years together, marriage, the whole architecture of a settled life, built on the assumption that he had been permanently chosen. And then she left. Not for another man, not for a version of love that Ross could compete with or understand through ordinary jealousy.
Now, who should I say tricked me into doing it?
She left because she discovered something true about herself that simply had no room for him in it. She left because who she actually was turned out to be incompatible with the role Ross had built his life around occupying. She did not reject Ross specifically, she rejected the entire shape of the life they had built. And for someone who had grown up believing that being chosen was the natural outcome of being Ross Geller, those two things felt identical. If you genuinely enjoy these kinds of deep character breakdowns, the things most fans completely miss, make sure you subscribe. There are many more of these coming. This is where the wound actually is, not in the divorce itself, not in the specific circumstances of how it ended. The wound is in what it disproved. It disproved the foundational belief that had been running quietly underneath Ross's entire existence. The belief that being him was enough to keep someone. And here is what Ross did with that disproof. He did not accept it. He did not update the belief. He decided on some level he never fully articulated even to himself that he was going to get back the certainty Carol took from him. Not Carol specifically, the certainty, and every relationship that followed was, in some part, a campaign to reclaim it. Before we get to Rachel, I want to sit with the divorce number for a moment. Because 3 divorces is a fact about Ross the show treats as an increasingly absurd punchline, and I think it is actually one of the most revealing things about him. 3 marriages, 3 divorces, each one happening with a kind of speed and intensity that suggests Ross is not simply unlucky or naive. He is running towards something. He is trying to build as fast as possible the thing that Carol dismantled. The settled, permanent, contractually confirmed being chosen. Think about the Las Vegas marriage. Ross and Rachel get drunk and get married in Las Vegas, almost as an accident, almost as a joke. And then when the question of annulment comes up, Ross balks. Not because he is in love with Rachel in that moment in a way that requires marriage to survive.
Yes, I am.
Right.
But because an annulment would mean another marriage ending, another piece of evidence on the wrong side of the ledger, he gets an annulment eventually, but his instinct in that moment, his first reaction, is to not let this one end either. Even a drunken Las Vegas marriage is preferable to another marriage that did not hold. That is not the reaction of someone who just really loves being married. That is the reaction of someone for whom divorce has started to feel like a specific and accumulating proof. Each one adds to the case that he was not enough to keep anyone, and the more that case grows, the harder he fights against the next ending, even when the ending is the obviously correct choice. Even when holding on is clearly making things worse, he holds on anyway because letting go means adding to the count. Now look at how quickly Ross pursues Rachel after she walks into Central Perk in that first episode. The show frames this as the resurrection of a longtime crush, which it genuinely is. But watch the specific quality of his pursuit. Watch how total it is, how immediately it becomes about wanting something permanent rather than something exploratory. Watch how fast he goes from "I have always had feelings for her" to "she is the one." That is not how people who are emotionally settled approach new connections. That is how people who are trying to fill a specific shaped hole approach them. Ross did not see Rachel and think, "There is a woman I would like to get to know." He saw Rachel and thought, "There is a person who could prove that I am still someone worth choosing permanently." And he immediately began pursuing that proof with an intensity that the show coded as romantic. Viewed from a slightly different angle, it looks like something else. It looks like a man using a relationship as a referendum on himself. It looks like someone who needs a specific verdict more than he needs a specific person.
Dartboard? Huh? What do you think? 2 days of darts. It'll be great.
Rachel was real to him, genuinely real, but she was also a test he had set himself. A way of finding out whether the Carol outcome was the final truth about him or just one data point in a larger picture. The problem with that setup is that the person being used as a test rarely knows they are in one. And the moment they start to fail the test, even in small ways, even for completely reasonable reasons of their own, the panic that follows is not about them at all. But that is not even the strangest part. The strangest part is what happens when Ross actually gets what he wants, because the pattern of his behavior once he is in a relationship is the clearest evidence of what is actually driving him. Watch how Ross behaves the moment any relationship starts to feel insecure. The moment any woman he is with shows even the smallest sign that she might be choosing something other than him. He does not get sad. He does not get anxious in the way most people get anxious about losing something they love. He gets controlling. He gets possessive. He gets into a specific escalating panic that is wildly out of proportion to whatever has actually happened. Rachel talks to a male co-worker. Ross ends up at her office at midnight. Ross makes a list weighing Rachel against Julie, as though she is a variable in a calculation rather than a person with her own feelings and her own agency. Ross says the wrong name at the altar. Ross does not want Rachel to take the job in Paris. Every single one of those things is the same moment, scaled differently. It is the moment when Ross's hold on being chosen feels uncertain, and when that moment arrives, he does not respond as a partner. He responds as someone defending the one piece of evidence he has been gathering since Carol left. And evidence, once you start treating it that way, requires constant defending. It can never be settled. It can never be enough.
And there are no more. I think I should be able to eat.
Because the question underneath it was never really about Rachel or Emily or any of the specific women in his life. The question was always about Carol, about what Carol's departure meant about him. And no amount of Rachel choosing him, however genuine and however real, could fully answer a question that was never actually directed at Rachel in the first place. That is why the reassurance never held. That is why every small sign of uncertainty triggered a response 10 times larger than the moment warranted. He was not overreacting to Rachel. He was reacting finally and without filter to Carol. Now I want to look at Julie specifically. She is the relationship the show gives Ross between Carol and the full Rachel storyline. And she reveals something very specific about the pattern. Julie is, by every external measure, exactly what Ross would want. She is smart. She is warm. She is interested in paleontology. She met him on a dig in China, which is Ross's world, a world where he is genuinely respected and capable and in his element. There is nothing wrong with Julie. The group likes Julie. Ross likes Julie. The relationship makes sense on paper in almost every way. And yet watch the Ross who is with Julie. He is pleasant. He is engaged. He is comfortable. But he is not the Ross who was pursuing Rachel. He is not the Ross who was leaving a message on an answering machine at midnight. He is not the Ross who was making lists and spiraling, not bringing the full weight of his need to be permanently chosen to bear on a single relationship. Because Julie does not represent the recovery of what Carol took from him. Julie is a genuinely good relationship that exists outside that framework entirely, and Ross, unconsciously, can feel the difference. He ends up choosing Rachel anyway in the end.
This is crazy. I can do this. All right, I bet I can get all 50.
Not just because of old feelings, but because Rachel is the pursuit that matters in the specific way the Carol wound made things matter. Rachel is the one who requires him to be chosen again, in a high-stakes, uncertain, risky way that makes the eventual choosing feel like proof of something. Julie was too easy, not in any disparaging sense, but in the sense that winning Julie's love did not address the question that Carol had left open. It was just a good relationship. And Ross, who needed to close the question more than he needed a good relationship, chose the harder thing. But that is not even the strangest part. The strangest part is what happens every time Ross gets close to genuine emotional vulnerability with Carol in the scenes where they share space as co-parents. He is almost always fine, warm even, genuinely engaged with her as a person and as a co-parent. And I think that ease is itself the most revealing thing about the whole situation. Because if Ross was still carrying romantic feelings for Carol, those scenes would be visibly painful. They would have the charged quality of someone trying to hide something. But they do not. They have the quality of someone who has genuinely moved through the personal grief and arrived somewhere functional and even affectionate.
You want to dance?
That's fine.
Come on.
Which means the unresolved thing was never about Carol as a person. It was always about what her departure did to his understanding of himself. Carol is fine. Carol being fine right in front of him, building a life that looks more settled than anything Ross has managed since, is actually the hard part. Not her, the evidence she left behind. But watch what happens to him in those scenes when Susan enters, when the life Carol chose over Ross's is present in the same physical space as Ross. He gets tighter, he gets slightly competitive in ways he cannot quite control. He and Susan develop an entire running tension that the show plays for comedy, but that is doing something much more specific underneath it. Ross cannot fully make peace with Susan, not because he objects to their relationship in any principled way, but because Susan's existence in Carol's life is the visible, daily, unavoidable evidence of the thing Ross has spent a decade trying to disprove. She is the proof that Carol chose something else, and she is right there at every shared event, reminding Ross of exactly what that means. This is the contradiction at the heart of Ross Geller, the one the show embedded without ever fully naming.
What? Great, now I'm having a baby.
He is capable of genuine love, genuinely tender, genuinely present, genuinely invested in the people he cares about. And he is also someone who experiences love primarily as evidence of his own adequacy. The two things run simultaneously, all the time, and the second one consistently sabotages the first. Because love that functions primarily as evidence is not actually sustainable. You cannot fully receive love if you are always checking it against what it proves about you, and the people you love cannot sustain the weight of being primarily the answer to your question of am I enough, rather than simply people you have chosen and who have chosen you back. There is something else worth staying with here, something the show treats entirely as wholesome, but I think it actually has a more complicated undertow to it. Ross is a genuinely wonderful father to Ben. Warm, present, enthusiastic, attentive. Every scene with Ben shows a side of Ross that is noticeably less defended than his adult relationships, less driven by the need to prove something, simply more loving. The fatherhood is real and it is tender, and it is one of the best things about him. But think about what fatherhood to Ben also does for Ross in the context of everything we have been discussing. Being Ben's father gives Ross a permanent, unbreakable connection to Carol's life. Not to Carol romantically, but to the architecture of the existence they built together. Ben is the one piece of that architecture that still stands. The marriage ended. The shared apartment ended. The shared plans and shared future ended. But Ben continues. Ben is the living, ongoing, unresolvable continuation of Ross's first permanent choosing. And Ross invests in that connection with everything he has. He shows up for every event. He is enthusiastic about every milestone. He maintains a warm relationship with Carol and a generally decent one with Susan. He keeps himself embedded in that world. And the show always frames this as simple, devoted fatherhood, which it genuinely is in one layer. But watch how Ross talks about Ben in the context of the wider group.
Ross,
You're not actually suggesting Helen Willick Bunch Geller, because I think that...
There is always a slight extra energy to it, a performance of exactly how good and present and committed a father he is, delivered to an audience that already knows and agrees. That extra energy is not about Ben. Ben does not need Ross to perform fatherhood for Chandler and Joey. The performance is for Ross. It is a reminder, repeated and public, that there is one permanent bond from the Carol era that nobody can dissolve. One thing Carol started that still belongs to him, that she cannot unchose, that proves beyond any reasonable doubt that he was worth something in that life they built together. Now, I'm not suggesting this is cynical or calculated. The love for Ben is completely real. But things can be completely real and also serve a function that the person doing them has not fully examined. And the function that staying deeply connected to Ben's world serves for Ross is significant. It is the function of never being entirely finished with the chapter that Carol started. As long as Ben exists and Ross is a devoted, present father, the relationship with Carol is ongoing, changed in form but not closed, not finished. And for a man who has never quite made peace with how that chapter ended, that ongoing quality might carry more weight than he realizes. More weight than simply loving his son. And then I noticed something that almost nobody talks about.
You know what, I'm gonna go. I don't think I can be involved in this particular family.
Look at what happens every time Ross gets close to genuine emotional vulnerability with Carol, in the scenes where they share space as co-parents. He co-parents enthusiastically. He maintains a genuinely decent relationship with Carol. He is at the hospital when Ben is born. He shows up. This is admirable in most readings, and it genuinely is admirable. But it is also something else. It is Ross keeping himself within reach of the life that was supposed to be his. The life that Carol chose differently. He does not fully separate from it, because fully separating from it would require him to accept that it is gone. And accepting that it is gone would require him to accept the thing underneath it. That he was not enough to keep someone in it. Now here is where I want to introduce something the show never fully articulates. But I think it is crucial to understanding the whole picture. Carol left Ross and stayed in his life. Not just in his life. She became embedded in it. She is the mother of his son. She is at Ben's birthday parties. She is at school events. She and Susan become, in some ways, more domestically stable than Ross ever manages to be. They build the settled life that Ross had expected to have with Carol, right in front of him, for years. And Ross, who could have kept his distance, who could have built something clearly separate, stays present in that world. He was not enough to keep Carol.
What's the matter?
Nothing. Okay, everything.
And he has spent the entire 10 years trying to avoid the moment that sentence becomes the final truth. In everything from the frantic possessiveness over Rachel to the sustained engagement with his own ex-wife's domestic life. This is the deepest layer of who Ross Geller actually is. Underneath the paleontology jokes and the divorces and the competitive need to always be right and the decade of romantic chaos with Rachel. Underneath all of it is a man who was unmade by being unchosen for the first time. A man who grew up inside the certainty that being him was enough, and who has been quietly, relentlessly, sometimes self-destructively rebuilding that certainty ever since. He never stopped trying to get back to the feeling of being Carol's person. Not Carol specifically, not that relationship, the feeling, the settled, permanent, unquestionable being chosen that he had before she left. And here is the thing that complicates all of this. He genuinely loved Rachel, not just as a vehicle for recovering from Carol, actually deeply, really loved her. The two things are not mutually exclusive. You can love someone genuinely and also be bringing more weight to the relationship than the relationship can properly hold. You can be authentically devoted to a person and also be unconsciously using that devotion as a proof of something that has nothing to do with them.
Don't! You can't just kiss me and think you're gonna make it all go away, okay? It doesn't work.
Ross did both, for 10 years. And the Rachel love story, which is genuinely moving and genuinely real, was also carrying the weight of everything that started with Carol. And Rachel, who was doing her own complicated emotional work across those 10 years, was never entirely just the person Ross loved. She was also the answer to the question Carol had left open. Think about the finale. Rachel gets off the plane. They end up together. It is the ending the show had been building toward. It is deeply satisfying in the emotional logic of the narrative. But what has Ross actually resolved? What has the 10-year journey actually addressed? Has he updated the belief that Carol's departure disproved? Has he developed the capacity to love someone without also needing them to be evidence? Has he made peace with the fact that he was not enough to keep Carol? That fact does not actually say anything about his fundamental worth as a person. The show does not ask those questions explicitly. It ends with the airport. But I want to sit with those questions a moment longer, because I think they are the whole point of what we have been building here.
Look, do you love her? And you don't have to be too emphatic about this.
Ross Geller spent 10 years making choices that were driven, at least in part, by the wound Carol left. And those choices caused real damage. To Emily, who deserved a husband whose attention was not split between her and the name he said at the altar. To Rachel, who was, for a significant stretch of their relationship, the answer to a question that was not really about her. To himself, who could never quite relax into anything permanent because permanence had become terrifying precisely because he had once believed in it completely. And the show never fully reckoned with any of that. It treated the accumulating divorces as comedy, and the jealousy as character, and the wrong name as a plot point. And it used all of it to build toward a romantic ending that feels genuinely satisfying in the moment. But healing and satisfying endings are not the same thing. An ending can feel right and the underlying wound can still be open. And the Carol wound, the specific disproof that everything started with, deserved more than a decade of consequence avoidance. More than a plane landing at the right time. It deserved a conversation that the show never quite found the courage to have. A moment where anyone sat across from Ross and asked not what happened with Carol, but what it did to him. What it quietly rearranged inside him in the years that followed, that he was never fully aware of and never fully examined, and that kept showing up anyway, in the wrong name at the altar and the midnight panic at Rachel's office, and the list that treated a person like a calculation. Ross deserved to have someone ask him directly, not about Carol, about what Carol meant to him, about what it did to him specifically, to be the kind of person who had always been told he was enough, and then to be the first person Carol chose against.
Well, I don't know. Okay. How about with the baby's name?
Marlon.
Marlon.
About whether the belief he had built his whole adult life around was ever actually examined. The belief that being him was the natural path to being permanently chosen, rather than simply defended more and more desperately. Nobody ever asked him that. Not the show, not Rachel, not anyone in that friend group. They had their own complicated relationships with the story of Ross and Carol, and were mostly just glad when he seemed okay again. And so the wound stayed open. The choices it generated kept coming, and the audience was left to figure out on their own what was actually happening underneath the comedy and the drama. The title of this video asks why Ross was never really over Carol. The real answer is that the question itself is slightly wrong. He was over Carol, in the straightforward sense. He did not pine for her. He did not want her back. He was genuinely glad for her life with Susan. Genuinely devoted to co-parenting Ben. He had clearly moved through the grief of the relationship ending. But he was not over what Carol represented. He was not over the things she proved. And that is a different and much longer project than simply moving on from a person. That is the work of dismantling a foundational belief about yourself and replacing it with something more accurate and more sustainable. Something that does not depend on someone else's permanent choosing to stay true. Ross may or may not have gotten there by the end. The show does not tell us, but if he did, it was not the airport scene that did it, forcing him, slowly and painfully, to keep reckoning with the original question, the question Carol left him with on the day she chose Susan instead. Am I enough? The answer was always yes. It just took 10 years of asking it the wrong way to find out. And maybe that is the most honest thing you can say about Ross Geller in the end. Not that he was simply the jealous one or the neurotic one, or the 3-time divorcee who kept making the same mistakes.
God happier than when two people, any two people, come together in love.
But that he was a person carrying a question that had been asked of him before he had any ability to answer it correctly. A person who built his adult life around not having to sit with that question directly, who found every possible way to answer it indirectly, through new relationships and new marriages and sustained involvement in his ex-wife's domestic world, rather than simply accepting that the answer was already there, inside him, independent of anyone else's choosing. The wound Carol created was not permanent. It was not even really about Carol. It was about what Ross believed about himself before Carol and what he was left with after. And what he was left with was a belief that had never been examined, now suddenly terrifyingly exposed. He spent 10 years patching over the exposure rather than looking directly at what was underneath it. That is not a judgment. That is one of the most human things about him. The answer was always yes, he just had to find a longer way home.